over time, having moved into that centre forward position, I think he's established himself as one of the standout players. I think, he could be one of the players talked about come the end of the season as the PFA Player of the Year. I really do believe that he's that good and can be that impactful. I don't think Arsenal are planning to go out and replace Eddie Nketiah. I think that if they were serious about any of the striking options that are available and out there this summer, they probably would have done the deal already. If the window ends with just those two coming in, obviously Raya signed on a permanent deal too. I will feel like maybe we haven't done enough to make sure that we're in a position to usurp Manchester City this year. A 2-0 victory over Wolves, a good way to start the season, but I think the performance was very much one of the opening day of the season. I think there were a few players who started the game really, really brightly for Arsenal, but maybe their levels just dropped off around about the 60th, 65-minute mark. Thankfully for Arsenal, they've got difference makers in this team, none more so than Bukayo Saka. And his goal in that second period kind of put Wolves out of the equation and put the game to bed, essentially. So I wouldn't say Arsenal were at their brilliant best against Wolves last weekend, but they got 3 points on the board and there were signs that they're on their way back to it, even if they're not quite there just yet. Bukayo Saka has always been a really important player for Arsenal. From the day he broke into the side, he's shown incredible maturity, consistency. Physically, he's been great. You think about how few games he's missed and the way that he gets treated on the pitch sometimes, the way he gets kicked about and knocked about, and to be able to be so available for the team is obviously massive, and it's a real testament to him, his fitness levels, how hard he works behind the scenes. Kai Havertz is someone that I don't think people thought was going to be as key a component of this team as he's turned out to be in the end. Started his Arsenal career in the midfield. I would argue that it didn't always work. At times it was effective, him making those runs from deep, but over time, having moved into that centre forward position, I think he's established himself as one of the standout players. I would go as far as to say that outside of the centre halves, he's probably the next name on the team sheet as far as Mikel Arteta is concerned. And the fact that he really desperately wants to get him in the side, whether that be in midfield or in attack, says so much about how much he brings to the table. Physically, he's incredible. He's strong. He's powerful. So quick across the ground as well, which is underrated, I think. People don't always sort of look at that because of his figure and his frame. All of a sudden, that £65 million that Arsenal paid to bring him in, it doesn't look as crazy as maybe some suggested at that point. A great signing. And him and Bukayo Saka are definitely the two most important components of Mikel Arteta's attack these days. I think Kai Havertz has got to be aiming for 15 league goals this season at the absolute minimum. I know people constantly say Arsenal need a striker, they need that cold-blooded killer in front of goal. And yeah, that can be true too. But I think that conversation, what it does is it takes away from the overall value that Kai Havertz brings. The link-up play, the tireless work that he puts in up front, the fact that he's so unselfish as well, and that he will drop deep if you need him to. He will come back and defend. He will get involved in those physical duels and battles that even though he's got the frame for, he might not necessarily be totally comfortable doing. I think he's changed his game since coming to Arsenal. And if he can add a few more goals as well, I think, he could be one of the players talked about come the end of the season as the PFA Player of the Year. I really do believe that he's that good and can be that impactful. Gabriel and Saliba over the last 2 seasons have established a formidable pairing at the back. I would go as far as saying it's the best central defensive pair in European football at the moment. And if it's the best in European football, you could go as far as saying it's the best in the world. I really do believe that. Ben White is really obviously valuable to their right. His ability to tuck inside when Arsenal squeeze up the pitch and all of that is brilliant. The one problem I would say that Arsenal maybe had at times in defence last season was at left back. And that was partly due to injuries. We had to make changes because of that. But also it was about Mikel Arteta finding that right balance between what he expects from his fullback in possession, but also what he needs from them out of possession. When it was Zinchenko and, you looked at him and obviously he started this season, you think great on the ball, fantastic in the build-up, but he is a defensive weakness and teams will target him. When you put Jakub Kiwior in, you were a little bit more solid defensively, but all of a sudden you didn't have that ability to progress the ball from there. And he certainly looked uncomfortable going into midfield. And you could say the same of Takahiro Tomiyasu. Excellent defensively, but in terms of creativity, I would argue almost zero. In Ricardo Calafiori, I think he's found the hybrid that he wanted. Jurrien Timber's back. and he will probably play in that role quite a bit over the course of the season. Calafiori was an opportunistic signing, in my opinion. I'm not saying that Arsenal weren't looking at him for a while, but when he became available and they realised that actually he can do both sides of the game, and he really showcased that last season for Bologna, but also in the Euros with Italy, the way he was carrying the ball out so confidently, I think Mikel Arteta thought, I need a bit of that, and he will be the guy that fixes the issue on both sides, defensively and offensively. So the defence, you're going to see rotation, you're going to see different players come in, but I think that's the one area in Arsenal's team that you could look at and you can say when everyone's fit, it is a complete part of the team. It feels like it's the right time for Eddie Nketiah to move on. He's been at the club for a long, long time. He's come through the ranks. He's shown flashes of what he's capable of. But if we're being completely fair, he's never really had enough opportunities, I don't think, to showcase the full extent of his talent. Do I think he's an elite level striker that could go and walk into one of the other big sides? No, not quite. But I think for a middle-of-the-road Premier League club, he would be a great get. England's all-time leading goal scorer at under 21 level. Okay, that hasn't translated into senior appearances, but he's got so much to offer. And I think we're at the point now where for his own career, he needs to move on. Arsenal will obviously want to make sure that they get what they can for him. I've heard some people saying that actually the money that's being talked about in terms of the deal with Nottingham Forest is even still not enough. But I look at it and I think if you have a striker who played so little football in the second half of last season, who was essentially knocked down from second choice to third choice when Kai Havertz started becoming a regular in that role, you have to accept and you have to understand that his value would have dipped as a result of that. I don't think Arsenal are planning to go out and replace Eddie Nketiah. I think that if they were serious about any of the striking options that are available and out there this summer, they probably would have done the deal already. I wouldn't rule anything out. Arsenal are in a position financially to be able to do that if the right player becomes available. But that's the key point. I think throughout the summer, we've been linked with Osimhen and Gyökeres and Benjamin Sesko, who we know that Arsenal had a serious interest in, by the way. But obviously that deal wasn't doable. And they haven't just gone, well, we desperately need one, so let's drop the money on anybody who's available. They're taking a really measured approach on this. They will bring in the right striker when he becomes available, even if it costs 70, 80, 90, 100 million pounds. We've seen them do that with Declan Rice. If they think it's the right guy, they're happy to do it. But do I expect there to be a big move for a centre forward between now and the end of the window? Not now. Wouldn't rule it out, but not at this stage. It doesn't look like anything is in the pipeline. If Arsenal finish the window having only signed Calafiori and Mikel Merino, I will be a little bit underwhelmed. I've got to be honest about that. I think that this summer was as much about outgoings as it was incomings. And I think if all the deals that we expect to happen do go through, Arsenal would have brought in a good amount of money for the first time in years, really, for multiple players that have been kind of on the fringes of the squad. Am I massively enthused by Mikel Merino? I think he's a good bit of business, a good signing, but he comes in as a squad player for me because whilst Rice, Partey and Odegaard are fit, to me, that's the midfield that Mikel Arteta needs to go with. Does he come in and complement that? Yes, he does. Does he give us a more natural option at left 8, which we don't currently have in the squad? Absolutely. Declan Rice is playing there at the moment, but is that really his best position? I still think there's a debate to be had about that. As of now, if the window ends with just those two coming in, obviously Raya signed on a permanent deal too, I will feel like, maybe we haven't done enough to make sure that we're in a position to usurp Manchester City this year. A new contract for Mikel Arteta would, I think, galvanise the fans right now. I know that everyone's really positive anyway and really excited about what the season's going to bring. It's gone from positivity to expectation now, which says so much about the journey that Arsenal have been on under Mikel Arteta and the steady progress and where we're at today. I think people are getting a little bit nervous, certainly from a fan perspective, about the fact that he hasn't signed this new deal yet. But I don't have any concerns about that situation, to be honest with you. I think that he is all in on Arsenal. I think the club are all in on him. The financial backing they've provided him with says as much. He's not giving off any hints or clues that, he believes maybe his future is elsewhere. So I think people need to relax and chill out. And I think that if it's not already done, it's close to being done. At least verbally, and then it becomes a case of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And I think Arsenal have been very good over the last few years at timing these announcements well. And so I think when the timing is right, we will learn of a new contract for Mikel Arteta. It's easy to look back at last season and identify Aston Villa as our downfall. They took 6 points from Arsenal, which was just horrible. And when you think about the fact that Unai Emery was the Arsenal manager, it didn't really go that well for him, and all of the discourse around him sort of after he left, and then the way people have sort of been questioning whether Arsenal were right to let him go because he's done such a good job at Villa. It's one of those narratives that as an Arsenal fan, you just don't want. I think he's the right man for Villa, Unai Emery, but he was never the right man for Arsenal. And those two things can be true. You know, it doesn't have to be so binary. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I think this is a really tough game for Arsenal, particularly given that I didn't think against Wolves they were at their best or anywhere near. I think Villa were a little bit off it in terms of what they're capable of against West Ham, but they were much closer to their best on the opening day than Arsenal were. So the fact that that's the case, the history of the fixture in recent years, and the fact that we're going away to Villa Park, it does worry me and it does concern me. Somebody asked me this morning if I would sign for a draw now. And there's a part of me that wanted to say yes, but we know that when you're up against Manchester City in a title race, there's so little room for error that you almost see every game as a must-win game. So to sit here and say, I'm okay with us dropping points, but have an ambition to win the Premier League, I don't think those two ideas marry up. So tough game for Arsenal. I think they're capable of winning it, of course. Whether they will or not is another matter. It certainly won't be easy, that's for sure. It's going to be a really, really interesting season because, Manchester City have set incredible levels over the last few years. And some people have suggested going into the campaign that, they might not be able to replicate that for a fifth year in a row. I wouldn't be so quick to write them off. For Arsenal, it's been consistent progress. So you'd be forgiven for thinking that they could go a little bit further than they did last season in terms of their points tally and total. Liverpool were the other side that were in contention for most of last season before dropping off a little bit at the end. But they're a bit of an unknown quantity at the moment under Arne Slot. They're going to play open, attacking football. They've got all the attacking capabilities in terms of their squad. But there will be question marks about the transition from someone as legendary as Jurgen Klopp to a brand new manager who's never managed in this division before. So it's going to be